Welcome, action fans, and thanks for joining us for another edition of All 90s Action All the Time, as we continue our look at some of the most notable action films of 1993. I'm your host, Scott Murphy, and on this month's episode, we are looking at the Dolph Lundgren vehicle Joshua Tree, aka Army of One. Alongside me to talk about this one, we have a very special guest, as we have managed to bring in the world's greatest Dolph Lundgren expert and the host of the Dolph dedicated podcast, I Must Break This podcast, Mr. Sean Malloy. Welcome, Sean.
Wow, man, that could be probably the most complimentary intro I've ever had. So thank you for that. I hope I can live up to the moniker that you just established there. Thank you.
I started listening to your podcast last year. I was not a big Dolph guy, and I've gone down a little bit of a Dolph rabbit hole courtesy of your podcast. So in my eyes, you are the number one Dolph guy.
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, when I started the show up, gosh, has it been almost 6 years now, I think. Yeah, when I started the show up, it was interesting. It's been a fun journey, I'll say that. And I've been saying it on my show, but I'm getting near the end of the show. I see the end in sight. So I'm going to be wrapping it up here. I'm thinking probably within the next year, just because I'm going to be caught up with Mr. Lundgren's filmography. But yeah, out of all the action guys, I think he has certainly had a fascinating career. And the fact that he's still around, that's the other thing that we have to acknowledge with Mr. Lundgren is, he started in 1985. And if you look at all of the action stars that were birthed throughout the 80s and the 90s, not many of them are still doing it. You know what I mean? Arnold obviously has that Netflix show, but I think for the most part, he seems to be done making the movies. And unless it's Rocky or Rambo, same thing with Stallone. But the fact that Lundgren, he's a survivor. I think a lot of my guests on the show have echoed the same thing. He's a survivor, and he has been able to survive and transcend the direct-to-video realm and get back on the big screen multiple times and then continue thriving in the small independent direct-to-video realm. And so I think that's commendable for so many reasons.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And like you say, that he definitely has staying power. And I think, a lot of the other action stars, like you say, are popping in and out of things. Stallone obviously has that new show, and I think the latest Expendables is going to be just a extended cameo. And same with Arnie, and he just pops up and does the occasional thing. And John Claude, he's in semi-retirement, and there's a lot of them who are just taking things here and there. But I've seen from Dolph Lundgren's filmography that he's still pumping them out 3-4 movies a year kind of thing. So yeah, he's definitely got some stamina.
Yeah, most definitely. And the film that you invited me on for, this works out wonderfully for me as well, mainly because, when I covered Joshua Tree, Army of One, I want to say that episode was back in, I'm pretty sure, I think it was 2018 or so, around that time when I recorded and released it. And it was one episode that, we're going to be talking about this film because it is, I think, very underrated. It's, for the most part, pretty unseen. I don't think many really know about it. And on that particular episode, we really just glossed over the film and some of the aspects of it. And obviously, I'm not expecting to do a comprehensive scene-by-scene analysis of the film, but I do think that this is one particular film that deserves a second look. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to re-examine the film, because I don't think I did the best job in doing that. It was still pretty early on in my show as well, so.
That's cool. I'm glad that I could do that for you.
Welcome to Joshua Tree, a nice, quiet place in the sun. Dolph Lundgren, a nice, quiet guy.
I see you turned out exactly like we all hoped.
On the wrong side of the law. George Siegel, a tough cop with a badge.
Makes no difference to me who makes this arrest. City, county, anything.
You like him?
I always liked him. But I'm gonna kill him.
Kristen Alfonso,
police officer,
a tougher cop. Who just got caught.
Don't shoot, he's got a hot!
In the middle. seatbelts and hang on for the ride of your life.
Why do you want to die?
You want to know what happened then? Watch what happens now.
A warrant was issued 40 minutes ago for the arrest of Deputy Marek. She is to be considered not as an abductee, but as an accomplice.
It's willpower,
Don't underestimate him. He's dangerous.
horsepower,
Tick, tock, tick, tock.
and firepower.
Time's up.
At 160 miles per hour. Because when it comes to getting even,
I want it all tonight, where everyone goes down.
he's taking revenge into overdrive. Joshua Tree.
Before we do examine the film, for the listeners, I usually give some background details on the film. Joshua Tree was somewhat unusually released in Japan first on March the 27th, 1993, and was released internationally, theatrically in various territories, but not in the US, where it made its debut on HBO on October 19th, 1994. And it was the same in the UK. It went direct to video in the UK, which might go some way to explain why it is one of his more underseen films from this time period. It was directed by Vic Armstrong, who doesn't have a lot of notable directing credits, apart from the Nicolas Cage bomb Left Behind. But I'm sure any action fan worth their salt will know Mr. Armstrong for his legendary stunt work. It was written by Stephen Pressfield, whose notable credits include the likes of Above the Law and Free Jack. Critically, it is currently sitting on a 5.7 out of 10 on IMDb. It doesn't have a Metacritic score. It's got 51% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 4 reviews and a 3.0 on Letterboxd. And despite it being released theatrically in some territories, there doesn't seem to be any box office information. I think at this time they were a bit more slack when it came to the international box office, counting the international box office as compared to the US box office, which obviously it didn't have because it wasn't released theatrically there. So that's the background details on Joshua Tree, aka Army of One. Now, as we start this conversation, usually I ask the guests if they've seen the film. Obviously, that would be a somewhat moot question when it comes to asking yourself. So just tell us a little bit about your relationship to this film, where you first saw it, and where this fits in the career of Mr. Lundgren.
Oh, wow. Yeah, this is a really interesting one. At least here in the States, what's interesting about it is it came out on VHS, courtesy of Live Entertainment, who is one of the many direct-to-video companies that Lionsgate later absorbed. And then Artisan Entertainment ended up putting it out on DVD back in the early 2000s. And then about 9 years ago or so, Shout Factory put out a special edition Blu-ray of the film that had a making of featurette and everything. Unfortunately, that particular disc has since gone out of print. And so finding this particular film, again, at least here in the States, is pretty hard to come by. What's interesting about this one is this was Lundgren's follow-up to Universal Soldier. And if you can go back this far, if you remember this time, when Universal Soldier came out, that was a film that was putting 2 action stars in their prime against each other. Okay, you had Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren squaring off. And what's great about that movie is it got people talking, not just about Jean-Claude, because Jean-Claude he was a rising name, but Dolph had been around thanks to Rocky IV and Masters of the Universe. But I don't think people... I guess it's safe to say maybe audiences forgot about him slightly. And with Universal Soldier, it put him back on the map. It put him back on people's radar. I distinctly remember when Universal Soldier came out, it seemed like it got a ton of attention mainly due to Lundgren's performance. Because if you've seen Universal Soldier, he's off the rails in that movie. He is absolutely just completely unhinged. He's easily, I think, one of the most memorable things about it. And so you'd think, okay, after a performance like that, his follow-up film would get a lot of attention. The follow-up film was the one we're talking about, Army of One. I'm pretty sure that he filmed this pretty quickly after Universal Soldier, because if you look at his appearance in the film, he's still rocking that pseudo shaved head that he had in Universal Soldier. So I think that the turnaround, or the interim between both films, was pretty quick. But what's interesting is, yeah, like so many of the films in Lundgren's filmography, this was intended to be a theatrical release, but for reasons that I still don't really understand, the powers that be determined it wasn't going to do well theatrically, and it was unfairly just dumped on HBO. It premiered on HBO in 1993, I believe. I didn't have HBO at the time, so I was not able to watch it then. So I had to wait for it to come to rental, and watched it then, obviously. And I immediately loved it. There's so much that we can say about the film, but what's really cool about it is, if you go from Universal Soldier, where he is just this completely off the rails, bigoted psychopath, okay, it would have been an easy route for him to choose another villain role, but instead he chose I guess you could say a good guy role, but there are shades of gray. You know what I mean? He's in between, but he's still on the good side that you're rooting for. But for the most part, he's playing a regular guy, which is cool. Which I think, outside of, I guess you could say, I Come in Peace or Dark Angel, he's a regular cop. You know what I mean? But with this particular film, he's just simply a truck driver, car thief, who happens to be in phenomenal shape and is amazingly talented with a gun, as evidenced in the warehouse shootout scene, which we'll talk about. But that's pretty much it. Yeah, that was my experience. Of course, bought the VHS. It was a budget VHS, I remember, and then got the DVD that was put out by Artisan, and then picked up the Shout Factory Blue that has now since gone out of print. But yes, that's my experience with the film in a nutshell.
Yeah, I did notice that it is quite difficult to get a hold of. I had created the schedule of what films I wanted to look at this season for this year, and before looking at where things were streaming, and I noticed, I was like, oh my God, this isn't streaming anywhere. But thankfully, a very kind person put it on YouTube in decent quality. So you can watch it on YouTube in decent quality. And I did manage to watch it there. So, but yeah, it has really fallen off the radar, this movie. So as we get into the start of the film, it's always a good sign when a film starts with Ken Foree, who I just, Dawn of the Dead is one of like my kind of top 5 films of all time. So I always like seeing Ken Foree in a movie, even if he is in this movie for about a minute. But he's surprisingly high build in the movie for a person who is in it for so little. Just this opening scene, and then flashbacks of this opening scene that happen twice in the film, once in a dream and once in just a kind of flashback, normal flashback.
Yeah, no, I would agree. But if we go back to Universal Soldier, and I said this on my episode, but it's interesting. Okay, I feel like that particular film, with regard to Jean-Claude Van Damme's career, the film had the intended effect, because it catapulted. Van Damme was already a rising name at that point, but it catapulted him to where he was getting bigger, more high-profile projects. What's really interesting, though, is if you look at Jean-Claude's follow-up film, that's what I think is so fascinating about these guys, is how Van Damme's career and Dolph's career almost oddly parallel one another. But if you look at Jean-Claude Van Damme, his follow-up film was Nowhere to Run. Okay, which has him kind of playing this unassuming car thief who's put in a situation where he's a little over his head. And that particular film takes place in this completely, if you look at the look of Nowhere to Run compared to Joshua Tree, not only are the two characters similar, but both films have a very similar look to them. Okay, because they both take place, for the most part, 98% of each of these films is in daylight. Okay, like just a stark, bright, heat-drenched daylight. And both characters are these escaped convict car thieves, if you will. Like they're good guys, but again, like I said earlier, they're shades of gray characters where obviously we want to root for them, but it's not like they were living their lives completely on the just moral side of the law.
I think they are. I'm not sure if they're like full anti-heroes, because this movie does a very kind of 80s, 90s action movie thing where the character that Lundgren is playing, Wellman Anthony Santi, which is a great character name, it's fun to say, he is obviously a kind of in-between character, if to use wrestling terminology. He's a bit of a tweener. But he's not like a kind of full-on anti-hero, because it does that very thing of the time where we make sure to know that at heart he's a good guy. This is obviously skipping forward a bit, but Ken Free dies in the opening scene. And we get a scene a little bit later where Lundgren's character meets Ken Free's character's son, and it gives him a kind of anti-crime pep talk. And this is like to notify us that, yes, he's an escaped convict. Yes, he's a car thief. Yes, he's a bit on the edge. But, he's got a heart of gold, really, deep down.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's something that I don't know, like a little bit later they might not have needed to put that in, just to make sure that that like he is essentially a good guy. It's not because I think that's maybe like the difference between like American cinema and certainly like kind of European cinema. There's no need to coddle the audience. If you watch like some of the original Django films or whatever, that guy is just like, he's barely a hero. And I think there's less like that need to comfort people, that you're rooting for the good guy, in the kind of that little bit of difference between European cinema and American cinema. I don't know if you feel the same way.
No, I definitely do. And I think when you paint your character with that particular paintbrush, okay, then it makes it excusable when, how do I want to say this? It makes it excusable when we see the character resorting to violence. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Yeah. There's the scene later on in the film where actually, if you want to back up, when Santi, okay, first of all, he kidnaps a woman. Okay. And he kidnaps this particular woman. And then when there's the scene on the street where she tries to escape him and the police are trying to arrest him. He is just letting loose with a shotgun, and he is shotgunning everything. Okay. Storefront windows and parking meters and everything. And wow, this is the good guy here. Okay. You know what I mean? Like it allows for some misdirection, which is earned. I think in many respects.
Yes. Although I do think that scene also counts towards making sure he's not a villain, and making sure that you are supporting the good guy. So while he is firing off this shotgun, which is crazy behavior, he's deliberately firing into what we presume are like empty shops. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we're supposed to guess that these shops are empty, and he's deliberately missing the police officers, because at this stage he's being painted by the police as like a cop killer, the corrupt police that we'll get into, as a cop killer. So I think that this is supposed to be shown as like an act of almost kindness to show to the female character Rita, played by Christian Alfonso, that he's not just some psycho killer.
And see, and I think I see where you're coming with that. I would almost slightly disagree with that in a way, because the film's really interesting with how it does it. Because if you think about it, we really don't we're on Santi's side a little bit in the beginning, but we don't fully get on his side until we see that the police are crooked. And then we hear Santi's side of the story. Okay. Mm-hmm. And Christine Alfonso, the Rita character, she's the audience surrogate. We're following her, and we're discovering that he is an innocent man right about at the same time she is discovering it too. And like I said, I certainly see where you're coming with that, but I also think that was the writing and the direction's way of, you know what I mean? Again, applying a little bit of misdirect to where, he is a bad dude. Why we're following this bad dude for 40 minutes so far, I hope he's going to be good.
Although I did find that you're right, the Rita character is an audience surrogate, but sometimes I found that slightly frustrating because I found that in terms of the writing, she as the audience surrogate was slightly behind the audience, so sometimes reiterated information that we could have already quite easily picked up ourselves.
True. But just look at the way, if you look at in the opening 5 minutes, the way in which Lundgren is speaking to his dad. You know what I mean? He is speaking, he just keeps calling him old man. And he is just speaking to him with such a disdain. And actually, we didn't even know that's his dad. As a viewer, we don't know that it's his dad until later on when they show us some pictures. But for all we're concerned, is he has a shotgun to this poor old dude's face as he's drenching himself in water. You know what I mean? And then we find out later on that that's his dad. And again, I can't help but wonder if, I don't know, it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback and look at it with 2020 vision, but I can't help but wonder if that's one of the reasons why Dolph chose this role as his follow-up, where he was saying to himself, okay, I've proven that I can play a bad guy and I can do it quite well, but I also like being a good guy. Who wouldn't? So he chose his follow-up to Universal Soldier, where he can successfully play both sides. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Where he can play both sides at, okay, he is the main character. He is going to be our hero. And I'm going to put that in loose quotes. But at the same time, he's I'm just going to say it. He is not a nice guy. I like this movie, but he's an asshole, to be honest.
Yeah, no, he's not a particularly brilliant guy, it has to be said. And I think that scene does work particularly well because, like you say, in terms of Rita being the audience avatar, the audience surrogate at that stage, she is ahead of us. That works well. When he's just sticking up the old guy, we just think he's just like a random old guy. And then we find out as the scene unfurls, it's his father. And I do think one of the things I did like about this movie, and I think it's something that often attracts me to action movie, is that mixture of action and humor. And there is, it's not like an action comedy. It's not like a Shane Black movie or something like that. But there is a vein of humor in this movie that I did enjoy. And one of the first scenes that I think the humor comes up is in those early interactions with Rita and the interactions with the old guy, where the old guy is, hey, what do you want me to do? You want me to fry you some eggs as well while we're at it? And there's some quippy lines that I enjoyed. Like also when Rita asks him, what did he do? What did he go to prison for? And Dolph quips that he turned away from Jesus. That gave me a laugh. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm into this film. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm on board.
Yeah. He is, again, I already said it, but yeah, this is a guy, I think Lundgren has had a lot of the same kind of sentiments that a lot of people have regarding a lot of these action dudes is, oh, they can't act. But he does a fantastic job, I think. You know what I mean? Again, he's playing a character that's straddling both lines, okay? He's not a nice guy. He's not a particularly good guy. But for the duration of this film, there are worse people out there, I guess we can say. I think that's the best way of saying it. Actually, I'm going to go back. Dolph is a bad guy in this movie, but in the end, there are worse people out there that he is going to take out. You know what I mean?
I guess that's the thing with it. Anytime you're creating a kind of anti-hero character, the reason that we support the anti-hero is you pit them against worse characters where you're just like, this guy isn't a good guy, but he's not as terrible as those guys. So I'm going to support this slightly terrible guy because those are really terrible guys over there.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those, it's that trope that we go along with anytime there's an assassin movie. Exactly. Anytime your hero is an assassin, okay, that's a bit of a tough sell, but you know what? In the end, those bad dudes had better be really mean if we're going to go. And so what they do, if you think about any of those assassin movies, for example, okay, we can rattle off a dozen of them right now if we wanted to. But if you notice with any of those movies, what they do is they always have the hitman. He doesn't really have a heart of gold, okay, but he has his morals, okay. There's the save the cat moment, if you will, where he's getting ready to take a shot, but oh, there's a little kid is in the way, or the person is holding up a baby or something like that. And so what they do in the film, which again, I think it's clear why they're doing it. There's the scene where Ken Foree's widow and son meet up with Santee, and they give him his shotgun, and they give him some clothes. And there's that scene where he starts comforting Ken Foree's son. And so you see that, and it's, oh, maybe he is pretty nice here. You know what I mean? If you remember, it's a really cool scene how they do it, where he starts hassling the boy because the boy tells him, "Oh yeah, I what is it? He stole the car or something like that. He was able to hotwire it." And Santee he really did that. And then he pulls him aside, saying, "What the hell are you doing?" And then he immediately gives him a hug and tells him, "You're better than this." And they clearly put that in to let you know, okay, yes, he is a badass. He is a felon who's escaped police custody, but he's also, there are some shades there that are going to help us sympathize with him and be on his side. And I think that's great writing right there. In the end, what that comes back to is that's fantastic writing.
Oh yeah, I think that's one of those kind of key scenes to make sure that we know that he is the guy to root for. He may not be a great guy, but because he really scares the kid of being like, "Oh, you think that's cool? I'm going to be dead on Sunday. Like don't end up like me. I'm backed into a corner." The kind of thing.
And he shouts it in that poor little kid's face with gritted teeth. Like it's
Absolutely. And I have to say, yeah, like you say, most of these action guys get stick for their acting. And to a certain extent, I don't think you need to be a great actor to be a great action star. I think that you need to have a screen presence, and you need to have, like a physical presence that is impactful, and you need to be able to do the action scenes effectively. And the acting is certainly part of it, but you don't need to be, I don't know, like a De Niro or a Pacino or whatever. You just need to give a powerful kind of presence. And a lot of these action guys aren't the greatest actors in the world, but they have a presence. And I do think that often these action stars probably do get more stick than they need to get. And I think that by and large, Dolph's acting here is as good as it needs to be, is as solid as it needs to be. I think in that kind of scene with the kids, he has that little dramatic moment. And I think for the most part, he deals with all the kind of humorous lines very well. I think like his only, there's kind of two downfalls, I think. One, I don't think at this stage in his career, he's terribly convincing when it comes to the trauma, when he's waking up from the dream of seeing Ken Foree dying. Like those kind of emotional moments are a bit iffy. And like most action stars, there's a love scene in this movie, and it's very awkward.
Oh God! Yeah. Well, I would argue as well. She is extremely easy on the eyes. Christian Alfonso, who I think is probably best known for on Days of Our Lives, like she's been on that soap opera for forever. But you know what? I would argue, and I know I'm gonna. One of my best friends actually has been on my show quite a few times. I think he's gonna strongly disagree with me, but I'm gonna be honest. I do not really care for the Rita character. I think the whole kidnapping, the grabbing a hostage, is so cliche. It really is. It's so cliche to grab a hostage. And you think about it if you're going to put this in the real world, okay, I get why he's grabbing a hostage, but don't you think, okay, if he is innocent, which he is, you're still kidnapping someone against their will. So in the end, you're committing another felony right there that isn't helping your case either. You know what I mean? So I'm not a fan of that angle. I get why they do it. Okay. It helps move the narrative along. And by adding her character, it is able to get out a lot of the exposition. You get a lot of exposition dump thanks to her character. Okay. But I mean, she is just, it's weird. She comes from that era, okay, where she's so awkwardly beautiful. Like when we first see her, she's at this diner in the middle of nowhere, breaking up with her boyfriend at the time, and she's wearing high heels and this dress skirt. And it's like, where is she going dressed like that? What is the purpose of this? And it's one of those things that's like 90s movies. 90s action movies in particular, we got to let that go. But it's one of those things where it's like, what is this here? Like,
Yeah, it does seem strange that she's dressed like that just to go to the diner and not like a night on Broadway or something, like or like to a fancy restaurant. Like, it is a bit odd.
yeah, you know that they threw that in there purely for eye candy, which again, it's 1993, Scott. Fine, you know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna let it go.
I think there is some kind of, in those sorts of terms, there is some kind of, they're not problematic. They're just gruesome. They're being thrown in there as particular kind of eye candy moments, like when Dolph first kidnaps the Rita character. We get like numerous lingering cleavage shots that are like, yeah, that's unnecessary, but it's the 90s. They feel like they have to throw this in there for the male audience, for the red-blooded male audience. And it's, roll my eyes, move on. Yeah.
And okay, she falls for her captor. Okay, so apparently we're supporting Stockholm syndrome here completely. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a big surprise that she falls for him. But like you said, the love scene is just so awkward for a number of reasons. And number one, I don't think Dolph has ever really been, I don't think doing love scenes is really his strength. You know what I mean? And which is fine. You know what I mean? It never really worked, I don't think, for Stallone. And with Arnold Schwarzenegger, we never saw it with Schwarzenegger because it's very unsettling watching Arnold Schwarzenegger kiss a woman, to be honest. But so that right there is hurting it. But then they do this thing where they're also eating this plant that is apparently indigenous to the Joshua Tree area of California. You know what I mean? And so like he's rubbing it on her. And so I guess it's supposed to be sexy, if you wanna call it that, but it just comes off as just more weird and, to be honest, grotesque. Like, it's just it's never worked for me. When I saw it in '93, and then when I watched The Shout Blue again, it's one of those things that not a fan of.
Yeah, I was not a fan of it either. I did find it very awkward. Like, I think a lot of action stars struggle with these kind of scenes and were forced into them because commercially filmmakers believed that action movies needed to have love interest and love scenes to sell as an extra selling point. And I do think it's very strange. It starts very strangely. They're both eating this fruit erotically. Maybe somebody on the crew had seen like 9.5 Weeks or something like that. Of course, this is 1993. The erotic thriller was still very big at the time. And then, like this kind of rubbing the kind of aloe vera on each other. It's very strange. It's very, and it's just, you just want the scene to get over and done with. And it's just, it just feels, I don't know, is something sticky and horrible about it. That's just, okay, all right, we've had enough of this. I'm thankful for the train that interrupts this scene going any longer.
Yeah, it's the motorcyclists, if I remember right. Aren't they like dirt bikes who come through and interrupt them? Yeah, and it's, thank God.
Yes, like there's a train that goes over the bridge. There's a train that goes over the bridge at the same time as the motorcyclists come upon them. So it's both at the same time, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, yeah, and we could chalk it up to the fact that you have a legendary stuntman turned director in the form of Vic Armstrong directing this. He's no slouch in the world of action movies, but it's one of those things where, is he the best person to direct a scene of this nature? I would argue probably not. He's not an Adrian Lyne, for example. He could probably do it better. The other thing about this film, and it's interesting, again, I have some people who will disagree with me harshly, and that's fine. But the other thing about this film that I've never really liked is the villain. Okay, George Segal is a phenomenal actor. Okay, the dude's a legend. Okay, so the very fact alone that Dolph Lundgren was able to star in a film alongside a legend like George Segal is amazing in itself. But he's playing the role so cartoonish. There's nothing wrong with your villain being a crooked cop. Okay, that's an archetype that we've seen numerous times. But the problem is the way he's playing the character, the way he's chomping on that cigar. Okay, and then he's wearing that particular hat. It, for me at least, does not ring true. It almost feels like a caricature. And I'm thinking it could be a couple of things. It could be because when I saw this in recent years, I had seen, what was it? I believe it was The In-Laws. Okay, I'd seen him in The In-Laws where he's playing the befuddled dad. And then he also did that sitcom, if you remember, throughout the 90s called Just Shoot Me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it could be perhaps because my memories of him are immediately tied to his comedic roles. So when you see him do that, when you see him do something like Joshua Tree, it's a little bit jarring. But I don't know. It's one of those things. And again, it's pretty polarizing. I know some people think that he's one of the bright spots in this film. Me personally, it's more distracting and it adds a level of camp to this particular film that I don't think the film needs. This particular film, Army of One, does not need a campy element in it, I don't think at all. Considering what you have at its core, you have an escaped ex-con who's trying to clear his name, and you don't need a campy, dirty detective who then is going to shout such grotesque vitriol. I mean, when he the way he speaks is just so misogynistic that it's, oh man, not a fan.
Yeah, I guess that's something that's often done, particularly at this era. I think it's done less now, where you have the villain be like super misogynistic or rough up women to really prove to the audience that he's the villain. I feel like that's a kind of familiar trope. But I agree with you.
Which, okay, you know what I mean? I'm sorry, but I mean, okay, if that's
okay.
what they want to, if that's what they want to do, I'm not saying that is ever okay, obviously in the real life or even in movies by today. But if that's what they're going to do in 1993, fine. Just don't make it George Segal. I just don't think, and I can't help, and I'm sorry I interrupted you. I do apologize.
Oh, it's okay.
But I can't help but wonder if the production and the director saw that George Segal was available, and this is what happened: is they saw that he was available, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, he is a name. Let's get him." And it's one of those things where it's just because he's a name. I don't know. Do you? I don't know. I'll let you go. But do you see what I'm saying? Did you agree, or did you like George Segal as Severance? I believe was his name.
Severance is his name. I'm on the fence about the character. Now, I have no problem with cartoonish villains. I'm a big fan of cartoonish villains. In fact, I've talked about this before on the podcast. I love Tommy Lee Jones in Under Siege. I love John Malkovich in Con Air. Over-the-top cartoonish villains are my bag. But I am on the fence about this character, and I can definitely see where you're coming from. Because my associations with George Segal are mainly comedic, I didn't really believe him as a villain because I think of him in things of, like that 90s sitcom he was in, things like Fun with Dick and Jane, stuff like that. So I guess that made him less imposing as a villain. And also, I think tonally, you're right. I think for this movie, this movie is obviously they're referencing many things. Obviously, at one point he's watching High Sierra on the television, and that's shot in some of the same locations. But it seems to be very much rooted in kind of 70s exploitation, in things like The Getaway or Vanishing Point or stuff like that. So a little bit more hard edged. So for Dolph to exist in that sort of film, in the kind of Sam Peckinpah, The Getaway, that kind of thing, that he's in one movie and George Segal is in another movie. So George Segal is in a Smokey and the Bandit film. And so that tonally does rub up against each other, I did find a little bit. A kind of, as much as I enjoyed some of George Segal's like funny lines, because he does have some funny lines, and he's a good actor and he delivers them very well. And there's the final chase scene where he's asking his partner to pass him a cigar, and then the guy's, "What? Are you crazy?" And then George, "What? Do you want me to be nervous?" There's certain lines like that gave me a laugh that I was entertained by. But I think there is that kind of thing where it does sometimes feel like you're watching two different films at once.
Yeah.
I was in the middle on it, I have to say. I didn't love the character, but I didn't hate the character either.
And it could also be, another theory could also be that, okay, George Segal was at a point in his career where, it's interesting, Dolph is at a point in his career after Universal Soldier where he's trying to get another big role that is going to elevate him. Okay. And then you have George Segal, who has been around for quite a while, and he suddenly gets that role that he is looking upon. And I'm not saying that, I don't want to speak ill of the deceased or anything like that, but it could also be that George Segal gets this role that he looks at as being, oh, it is just a Dolph Lundgren movie. You know what I mean? That he almost looks at as being a bit beneath him. So then he is purposely ratcheting up his performance to a level of camp because he views the film as being beneath what he is used to doing. I'm not saying that I'm an expert and that's what it could be, but you almost wonder if that's what's going on as well.
Yeah, for sure. That's highly possible. Action movies, the two podcasts I have done cover action and horror, two genres that are generally looked down upon. And I think maybe at this point, obviously, I think probably the height of George Segal's career was probably the 70s with things like The In-Laws and Fun with Dick and Jane and stuff like that. Maybe he did mosey into this thinking like, it's just like a daft action film. I'm going to play it broad. I'm going to try and chew the scenery, steal some scenes. And so maybe he did go into it with it. It's hard to know what his thoughts were, but it's certainly a possibility, I'm for sure.
What's also very interesting about this film is, okay, it's very clear that Vic Armstrong is trying new things and also copying and emulating what is popular and big at the time. Case in point, obviously, the Chop Shop shootout. Okay, there is an extended shootout sequence where Santee goes to talk to, I believe his name is Jimmy Shoeshine, if I'm not mistaken.
That is right, Jimmy Shoeshine.
Who a wonderful character actor right there. Falling down, him as the convenience store clerk and falling down. Oh my goodness, that's a great scene right there. But what's interesting is that particular scene, it is an amazing shootout sequence. Okay. But it's very clear that Vic Armstrong was influenced by the films of John Woo, which were starting on, at that point, 1993, were on their way into America. We were starting to see that particular style of filmmaking. And so it's very clear that that is why he included that scene in the film. What's slightly, I love the scene, don't get me wrong, the way when Dolph is on like the, I don't know what you want to call it, but it's what slides underneath the cars the mechanics use.
Yeah.
Right. The little dolly, if you will. But when he's sliding on that with a gun in each hand, blasting everyone away, it just looks so cool. But what's so funny about it is it's okay. Number one, I don't know how a car thief is so amazing with a gun. Okay. But also, if you really wanted, you could take that scene out of the film completely. You could completely excise that scene and the narrative is still going to work just fine. It's a great scene. Okay. I'm not saying I don't want it out, but you could take it out and it's going to, I think in the end, play, the movie's going to play just fine. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree with you about the shootout. You could take that scene out and it wouldn't affect the overall plot and narrative of the movie. I do love the scene. It's very well done. All the like you say, it is a bit confusing. This guy, as far as we know, the only information we have about this guy is he's a former racing car driver. He's a car thief. We know he can do that. He obviously works out because he's Dolph Lundgren. But yeah, where all this shooting skill comes from, who knows? But it is really fun. I think like part of the problem of the scene is it does feel like a finale to a film. And this scene happens about an hour in, and the movie's just over an hour and 40. So, like, as much as the actual finale of the film is still fun, it is overshadowed by this scene. But I still love the scene. I still love that they put it in, like you, the dolly shot where he's firing the two guns, sliding along on that. And when he's actually going on the dolly down a slide as well, shooting off a gun, that's really fun. And also, it gives us this film's most entertaining mini subplot where Michael Paul Chan's character of Johnny Shoeshine, he has, I don't know, I think we're supposed to take it, a number one henchman. A number one henchman says that this Santee guy, he's just a driver, not a killer. I'll take him out, no bother. We get a fun fight scene between Dolph and this guy, and then Dolph stabs him in the neck and then runs the blade down his throat into his chest. But number one henchman does not die and actually comes back a few scenes later out of nowhere pops out of a Ferrari and attacks Dolph again. And I just found this, I don't know, it was one of the highlights of the film for me. What was your thoughts on that, Sean?
Yeah, like I said, it's, again, Vic Armstrong. This is a guy who, I believe, what was he? Wasn't he Harrison Ford's stunt double?
Yeah, I think on Raiders, yeah. I think,
Raiders.
On the Indiana Jones movies, yes, I think it was Harrison Ford's stunt double. Yeah.
So this is a guy who knows the genre and knows how to do those particular scenes, similar to Craig Baxley, the director of Dark Angel or I Come in Peace. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's such a cool scene. He's using dual-handed weapons, which, again, John Woo, that right there. And then he's even using it's not a full-on flamethrower, but he's using one of the, isn't it like the gas? Like the gas nozzle, yeah, right? He's using that as a flamethrower too. He's also kicking a barrel.
I think it's the thing they use for like paint stripper, and then he just
that's it. Yeah,
he lights a lighter in front of it and sets it on fire. And apparently, I was reading kind of background information. Apparently, Dolph blew that take because he was so shocked by Andy Armstrong, because the whole Armstrong family are stuntmen. Andy Armstrong going up in flames and doing the full body burn, which is obviously probably the most dangerous stunt you can do. It's the number one that stuntmen are cautious to do.
I want to get your take real quick. This is a nitpicky thing to point out, but it's one thing that's always stood out to me on my respective show. One of the things we always, it's not like it's a sticking point that I always am noticing, but we always seem to reference it on the show, which is interesting. But it's Dolph's attire. Okay, if you look at, I always like to look at the wardrobe, what the costume designer set up for the film, and because it's one of the things that for me is one of the most unique and memorable, but also head scratching. So if we're to believe, okay, Lundgren, his character he's on the run, okay, but he's also trying to remain inconspicuous slightly, and so the clothing that they give him, black pants and this button-up short sleeve shirt that he has tucked in, but is also halfway buttoned down his chest. You know what I mean? And it has the pockets on each breast or whatever. And so it's one of those things where it's, first of all, that's not very conspicuous clothing right there. And I don't know, it's one of those things where it's, okay, they clearly dressed him this way so that he can show off his biceps or whatever. But even in 1993, I would question if anybody would wear that particular shirt and that outfit. He looks cool in it. I'll give him that. But it's one of those things where, do you see what I'm saying? Or is that, am I getting too nitpicky there for you there, Scott?
No. First of all, yes, it's not a very inconspicuous outfit. And sometimes, I think like in action movies, that's the stuff that sometimes you need to get let go, because I am up to a point, I am accepting when films follow the rule of cool, which is, it doesn't make sense, but it looks cool. And some movies take it too far and you're just like, okay, none of this makes sense. And you're just trying to be cool for the sake of it. But just sprinkling it throughout, I'm fine with. So I think they're following that. And I think also like I don't know, I do feel like there is a kind of very throwback feel to this. So I think it's not like people are dressed like it's the 70s or anything, but I do feel like there is an element of that, of everything looks and feels a little bit like a 70s movie. And I feel like that's like a kind of conscious choice on Vic Armstrong's part, that he's kind of, I don't know. Did you pick up on that? Did you get that?
I get that. I certainly see that. Yeah, I guess if you frame it like that, I could see that. And I guess maybe even a Western. I think this is a modern day Western, so it only makes sense to dress Lundgren as a cowboy, if you will, in modern days. So I certainly understand that. And it's just one of those things where already he is a very rarefied being. So seeing him walk the street or whatever is going to be interesting. But then in that particular, it's almost like something Fabio would wear on the cover of one of those romance novels. It's, in any case, I will say regarding Vic Armstrong, if we look at the end, because it seems like that's where we're going, the one cool thing about this particular film is, again, narratively, Lundgren's character is a car thief / former racer. So it only makes sense for the film to end with a car chase. And man, is the car chase filmed cool. Nowadays, they would probably just use drones for a lot of those shots. They would probably use pretty much all CGI, to be perfectly honest. But the fact that they had these two wicked looking sports cars, I think it is hilarious that apparently Severance just hops in the black one and Dolph hops in the red Ferrari, right? But the fact that they're filming that scene in the mountains like they are, you know that they had some helicopters go up in the sky and they are actually physically shooting that particular scene. And it looks great. Again, from a narrative standpoint, if your lead character is going to be a supposed former driver, okay, then yeah, you'd better have the climax end with a race. And on that front, they definitely deliver. That's one thing that obviously should not be cut.
Oh, absolutely not. And I think that's where Vic Armstrong's strength as a director comes out, because the film is directed solidly for the most part. The dramatic scenes are fine; they're not flashily shot; they're just solid, competent. But where he comes into his own is particularly these two scenes: the warehouse sequence, which is really well shot, really well edited, and this finale, this final car chase, where we get these brilliant aerial shots, and it's a really fun car chase to watch. I do love, sometimes I try to find background information on these films and sometimes try and find articles, and I always read the IMDb trivia and stuff like that, some of which is complete bullshit. IMDb trivia, very hit and miss. But I do love the kind of, you were talking about Dolph's attire, and I do love what people focus on, because in terms of goofs and things like that, because if you look at a lot of action movies on IMDb, you'll always get somebody who's, this gun doesn't do that, da 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 da, and I'm like, I don't care, but it's fun that you're interested in that. So obviously on this one, we have some sort of petrol head who went on IMDb because it was stuck in their bonnet that the Ferrari F40 that Dolph is driving is actually much faster and much more nimble than the Lamborghini Countach that George Segal is driving, but they're depicted in the film as being quite evenly matched. And it's just things like that I find quite entertaining. Just the little details that people get hung up on. And I'm not dragging that person's down for it, because sometimes I get hung up on a little detail that nobody else noticed as well. So I just think it's fun what different people, the eyes that different people watch movies.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I hate bringing it up. That was always one of the things. But yeah, that's what's so cool is, and again, it's one of those things where it's, okay, these two superpowered sports cars, these foreign sports cars, I think we should say, are racing through this mountain. And it's one of the things, that there is going to be the final fight. It's going to take place on top of the mountain where someone is going to fall off. You know what I mean? That's one of the things is, anytime you're going up to a high place, that's what's going to happen. It's kind of action movie shorthand. The thing that this film does that I really, it does a number of things that I really like, but one of the film's strengths is the set and the scenery. Okay. I'm a firm believer in that location scouting is a character in itself. Okay. That set that you create, wherever it takes place, it has to be a character. Okay. And this goes everywhere from Rocky. Okay. The city of Philadelphia is just as much a character as Rocky, all the way to something like The Evil Dead. Okay. And that's a confined setting within a single room cabin, but it is even a stronger character, I think, than Bruce Campbell. And so what this film does is, the film's initial title is Joshua Tree. And man, that California landscape and mountainous locale and just the whole area of Joshua Tree is a central character that is alongside Dolph as being a focal point in the film. And Vic Armstrong does a wonderful job in not only shooting it, but also including it through pretty much every narrative beat of the film. You know what I mean?
I absolutely know what you mean. And when you've got, it's hard to shoot it poorly when you've got such a spectacular landscape like that to work with. And I think that something that we haven't talked about actually, that I think works really well as well. And I think, like you say, the landscape itself becomes a character. But I think what makes that character even more full-bodied is the kind of very deserty Joel Goldsmith score that goes with that landscape.
Right. That was going to be my next point. Yeah. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Yeah, the score complements the setting wonderfully. And surprisingly, it has not been released on an official album of some kind. But yeah, no, you're exactly right. His score that not only opens the film but carries the film all the way throughout to its end is absolutely beautiful. It has this like twang, you know what I mean, to it, also mixed with, and it's very simple. But no, you're exactly right.
Yeah, it kind of has like an almost like a kind of bluesy Stevie Ray Vaughan type twang. Yeah, I think it's really. I was surprised actually, like you, that it's not been released. I thought it was really good. I was seeing if maybe being released, looking on Spotify and stuff like that, but no sign of it. But no, I think like he does an excellent job, and also like cutting to the finale, like you say, on the cliff top. One thing that I did appreciate about the Rita character, even though, like you, I wasn't a massive fan of the character, it's one of those things that I think at this time it was just like a love interest. We need to have a love interest character, so we need to have something there. But one thing I did like about the writing of that character is that we've covered a number of 90s action movies on this podcast, where there is a female character, a female sidekick, or a love interest who is capable and witty and seems to have a brain in Act 1, but seems to have lost all those qualities by Act 3. Just becomes completely helpless, and that's it. Whereas the Rita character actually still remains relatively badass throughout, and like even manages to briefly escape George Segal, like by beating him up a little. And her capabilities don't seem to reduce as the movies goes on in the same way that I've seen in a lot of other ways, which I thought was an admirable aspect to the writing.
Yeah, no, most definitely. But I do have to laugh. Okay. It's one of those things. Okay. This is nitpicky, but it's one of those things. It is interesting how at the beginning of the film, she is breaking up with, what is that actor's name? Because Matt Battaglia, that's it. Yeah. Interestingly, he ended up taking over for Van Damme for the Canadian made for TV sequel to Universal Soldier. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Yes, I did read that. Yes, yeah. I've not seen those ones, but yeah.
But it is just very interesting how the film opens, or excuse me, when she first comes into the movie, she is breaking up with him. Okay, Matt Battaglia, and he's just this nice, good guy cop. Okay, and then the last we see of Rita at the end of the movie, she is embracing with Santi's character, who is this escaped ex-con character, and it's just one of those things where it's, man, women really do prefer the bad boys, don't they? Like, it's the nice guys that finish last. All women want the bad boy. Apparently.
According to the movies, anyway. Like, I think that is the stereotype for sure. Yeah.
But overall, it's one of those films where it's interesting. I would agree with you completely. I don't think Dolph's acting in the dramatic scenes is maybe at its best. However, I do think he does a very solid, competent job in the other scenes. I think one of the standout acting moment for me is again where he is Ken Foree's son, how he's turning him straight. I just think his little monologue there is wonderful. But in the end, I think anyone who ever comes to me and says, man, Dolph Lundgren, you have a podcast about him? The guy can't act. I always would put, obviously he got a ton of acting acclaim for Creed 2. Okay, I don't want to discredit that. But I always say, you know what, you need to check out Men of War and Army of One. Okay. Fortunately, Men of War is readily available. You can find that one. Army of One, you got to do a little bit of digging. You said that it's on YouTube, apparently. So, yeah, but I think those are two films in his CV that have really, I wouldn't even say really have been forgotten. They're undiscovered, to be perfectly honest. I don't think they ever were given a fair shake, even upon their release. So yeah.
yeah, he did performs pretty well. I recently watched Men of War not that long ago, just a couple of months ago. So I think he does a decent job, and I would definitely agree he does a decent job. Even though I do think overall the movie is stolen by BD Wong, but I do think that I think Dolph is good in that, and it's a good film. I do agree that people should check it out. I will also put the YouTube link if people want to check this movie out, which I think they should actually, because we've talked about some of the pitfalls of the film. We've talked about some of the things that don't quite work for us. You're not a big fan of the villain. I was on the fence about the villain, although I like some moments with him. And yet, the Rita character is maybe surplus to requirements. But there is some really good action here. The finale, that final car chase is great. The warehouse shootout is great. While it is very thin on plot, and most of the characters are never get out of being two-dimensional, I do think that some of the dialogue is very fun. I think there's a lot of fun dialogue in the movie, and there's not like I say, it's not a straight up action comedy. That's not the kind of movie we're at, but there is a nice little dollop of humor on top as well throughout the movie that I think elevates it a little bit further. And so, yeah, I would definitely recommend that people check this one out, because, like you say, I think it's maybe an underseen effort in Dolph's filmography and just in 90s action films generally. So I don't know. I guess we're at the time of final thoughts, and I guess I've already given my final thoughts. But Sean, if you want to give any final thoughts or anything that we've not talked about the movie that you feel should be flagged up.
I think we've hit all of the points. This is a very unseen film of Dolph's. I think even by a lot of action completists, this is one particular film that just never really gets talked about. How many top 15 lists? It seems like anytime a Creed movie comes out or an Expendables movie comes out or something like that, all these articles always come up online charting the top 10 Dolph Lundgren movies. You know what I mean? And it's always the same ones. And this is one that is just, like I said, it's been forgotten. I like to say it came from the era of Dolph is that I've coined the experimental era. So I would say from about 1993 to 96, 97, I've coined that the experimental era, because this is the era where Dolph was doing films that were intended to be released theatrically, and they were never given the fair shake, and they all, for the most part, with the exception of Johnny Mnemonic, they all went direct to video. But if you look at all those films, he's trying something new in every one of them. Okay, post Universal Soldier, he does this particular film. Okay, he did Pentathlon. Pentathlon is not good, but again, he's playing a different character. He does Men of War, which we talked about is amazing. He did Silent Trigger, where he's playing the kind of silent assassin, but with a moral compass. All of those films, and Johnny Mnemonic, he's playing a deranged preacher. You know what I mean? Every one of those films, again, they have a polish and a sheen about them to where you can tell that they were intended to go theatrical, but sadly, that's not the direction they went. But every one of those films, he's trying something different. And while they all fall in the action genre, he's at least playing a new character. So I would say if anyone has not seen, we've gone back and forth in referring to it as both Joshua Tree and Army of One. Okay, both titles, I'm indifferent to both titles, to be perfectly honest. But obviously, if you can watch it on YouTube, I guarantee people are not going to be disappointed. I guarantee people are not going to be bored. It's Dolph. He's carrying the same look and physique and everything that he had in Universal Soldier. So it's pretty much, if the idea of Andrew Scott driving a Ferrari and rubbing aloe on the Days of Our Lives star in a very awkward love scene sounds appealing, then by all means check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. We probably shouldn't sell it in the love scene. Just probably the warehouse scene.
The completely, that's what we'll say, the completely unnecessary but absolutely fun warehouse shootout scene. There you go. We'll sell it on that.
Yes, I think we definitely should sell on that, because that is undoubtedly the highlight of the movie. And it is one of those things, like, it's one of those things. I love how ridiculous it is. Apparently, I also love that it was just thrown in there because, like you say, Vic Armstrong just liked John Woo movies, and he was like, let's do this. Because apparently in the original script, he only killed 5 guys in the warehouse, but they changed it on shooting, and so it becomes like a Bond movie where suddenly dozens of people come from nowhere just to line up to be shot. But yeah, and it's squibtastic, and yeah, it's really fun. And the one on YouTube, thankfully, is the unrated edition. It's not the heavily cut UK edition that came out that took away all the bloody squibbiness of that scene. So you get your full money's worth on the edition I found. So yeah, I think that's pretty much brings us to the end of the podcast. Before we head on out, Sean, just plug away your podcast. Tell everybody about your podcast, where they can find it, and obviously we are casting buddies as we're both on the Last of the Action Heroes network. But yeah, give any social media information, anything you want to plug.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. Yeah, to anyone who is listening and would to hear me drone on more about the extensive filmography of Mr. Lundgren. Yeah, the show is called I Must Break This Podcast. We are almost at 100 episodes, and we are available on iTunes, Stitcher, also on Facebook. You can follow us on Facebook as well. But yeah, it's been a ton of fun. And the great thing about the show is, in addition to reviewing and discussing these particular films, I've also gotten to chat with many of the individuals who've had a hand in making these films. Everyone from directors to screenwriters to actors, stunt performers, everyone who's helped make these films the final products that they have been on the show. So in addition to all of the review episodes, there's also quite a few interview episodes that I've been very blessed to get to speak with these individuals. I recommend, and my buddy Chris said it perfectly, even if you're not a fan of Mr. Lundgren, I think there is some fun to be had, because in the interview episodes, you really get a great inside look at just the world of independent, low-budget filmmaking and how difficult it really is. I think it's been interesting on that front, and I really do appreciate you having me on. Thank you very much. This was a ton of fun getting to revisit this film that I don't think I did. I'll just be honest. I know I didn't do the best job covering on my initial run 5.5 years ago. So thank you.
Oh, that's no problem at all. It's a pleasure to have you on. I would recommend that all my listeners check out your podcast. It is a lot of fun. I think I mentioned earlier, it's been my kind of gateway to Dolph. He wasn't particularly one of my guys as a kind of growing up. I've watched several of his films over the last year, so that's thanks to you and your podcast. And you've managed to get some great guests on the podcast as well. So interviews with the likes of Patrick Kilpatrick and Vince Nicola, did the music to Rocky IV, and a bunch of other people. The review shows are also good. So definitely, listeners, check that out. And also, if you want to give this podcast some love, you can by rate, reviewing, and subscribing on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I used to say Stitcher, but I don't think Stitcher exists anymore, so not there now. And yes, so do that. 5 stars, please. It really helps with the algorithm and all that. If you want to reach out to us on social media, you can via our, I guess I have to call it X now. Ugh. Twitter. It's Twitter. So you can follow us there and give us any feedback there. Or if you want to just give me feedback, you can at Scott Murphy 85. And yeah, that's it. That's all for this episode. So it just leaves me to say thanks again for listening, and tune in next month when we will be covering, wait for it, Hard Target. Tying it all in. John Woo referencing movie to actual John Woo movie. So join us then. I'm sure that episode will be a lot of fun. Until then, though, see ya.